kind of thing. So, but the topic for today's webinar, Accepting Uncertainty, is one that there's kind of some irony in doing a presentation on it, because part of accepting uncertainty is perhaps having less to say, and and having less explanations for things. And so it's kind of an ironic thing to then say, here, let me talk to you about this topic. So I've got, let's see here, is this gonna work? Yes, so for today, one thing I wanted to start with was kind of talking about fear and anxiety, and normalizing fear and anxiety a bit, especially in the midst of what we're going through. And then do a little practice of mindfulness as a way to open up to, that kind of more letting go orientation rather than a clinging orientation. Maybe talk a little bit more about the problems with a clinging or controlling orientation, and then discussing both epistemic humility as a concept, but also as something we can apply in our lives, and discussing psychological flexibility as well, and how we can apply those things. So before we get into just kind of the normalization, I was thinking of uncertainty and uncertainty scripts, and thinking of how, what are the things that go through our minds when we're faced with uncertainty. And just some of the things that came up for me, and things that I've noticed working with other people that seem to be common, were thoughts like, I don't know what's going to happen. There's so much that is out of my control. Or related to that, there's nothing I can do. Or related to that, what should I do? Or what can I do? Another one, I feel unsafe and insecure about the future. Those might be some uncertainty thoughts or scripts that go through our minds. And we're faced with those more, of course, when we are in the midst of a big change, a big event, or like this global pandemic that's going on. We don't know what's going to happen. The foremost experts in the field are saying they don't know what's going to happen. They have predictions and projections, but they also acknowledge that there's more that's unknown than what they know. And so it's hard to prepare for the unknown. In fact, perhaps it's impossible to prepare for what we don't know. But can we change our orientation to accept and better live with that reality, that perhaps that's more part of our reality than we realize most of the time. So when all those scripts that I listed, it's very possible and likely, I think, that these things were true before, and maybe we're just more aware of them now. And of course, people who struggle with anxiety disorders, oftentimes they're faced with this kind of uncertainty every day. They're faced with not, what if questions, and feeling like they don't have control, or that they need to figure out how to control things that are unraveling. And so it seems like in some ways the whole kind of the whole world is entering into this kind of anxiety disordered space. However, maybe it's not disordered. Maybe we pathologize anxiety and fear too often. So briefly want to touch on that idea that, is anxiety bad? Is fear bad? Is it bad in and of itself? We talk like that sometimes, like, there was those shirts, I don't know if it was in the 90s or in the early 2000s, the no fear shirts. And we talk about, live our life from love instead of fear. And anxiety is usually considered as a disordered way of approaching the world. And it's true that anxiety disorders are real, and they are very difficult for people to deal with, and there is good reason for people to try to get treatment for that. And at the same time, anxiety and fear has a valid place in our lives now and in our evolutionary history. And so I think it's helpful to us to think, how can anxiety and fear and any difficult emotion actually be communicating something helpful to us? And anxiety and fear often are related to uncertainty, but so is depression. And so on one hand, anxiety, the anxious approach to uncertainty might be like, I don't know what to do, what should I do, and kind of looping that through our head, or what if this happens, what if this happens, feeling out of control. And to the extent that the anxiety or fear activates us to do something actual that will keep us or someone we love safe, then that's a good thing. If it prompts us to wash our hands more, to socially distance, or to figure out how to socially distance in a way that's going to work better for us, then that's a good thing. And it's when those loops don't stop that we become fatigued and overworked, and just it becomes more disordered. But some anxiety, some fear is probably helpful to us. The way that I think uncertainty relates to depression is, and this is how sometimes depression relates to anxiety, sometimes we get so paralyzed with those what if questions, or what can I do, or what should I be doing, that we get fatigued. We start to feel hopeless, like even a learned hopelessness, like nothing I do will be enough, like it's out of my control, and I'll always feel this way. And then that kind of nothing I can do will be enough to fix it, or to feel in control, or to feel satisfied, or to feel complete, can make us then feel like, well, then I might as well not do anything. And that is hard to cope with. Certainly, a thought on that is, this is where kind of changing the orientation or the approach to our thoughts, rather than changing the form of the thoughts, can be helpful. The idea of, what if we engage and we do things not because it's going to somehow make everything better and make everything certain, and it's going to save us in some way. If we take the theological route, like some works or something that we do is going to be enough, and finally we're going to reach the mountaintop and be, okay, now I'm all right. Now I can breathe. What if we do things not for that reason, but because we can do things, but because we have a body, because we're alive? Accepting that it's not going to fulfill us, that it's not going to, satisfy us in some fundamental, complete way, and yet that our body wants to move. Our heart's beating, our lungs are breathing, we're alive, and so we can kind of step back from clinging or needing final certainty and other things that we might perceive or be thinking are going to fulfill us, and we can sit back and say, okay, I'm alive, and there's people around me or not, or whatever my situation is, and come back to this present moment place and say, what do I care about? What do I want to go towards, even more than being certain? Is there anything I want even more than certainty? And that might be, for a lot of us, what tends to clarify is, I want to love, I want to connect, I want to experience beauty or create beauty, kind of that truth, beauty, goodness trifecta. So this is a setup here to then talk about and practice mindfulness, which mindfulness can be a powerful way to change our orientation from a clinging orientation to controlling the content of our experience, the thoughts, the emotions, the sensations, to an orientation of letting go of clinging and trusting that life, and if you're a religious person, that your higher power or nature or life, or as it is, um, that life is in control and we don't have to be. Doesn't mean that we don't do anything, but it means we can let go of that and experience things right here, right now, in this moment. And that actually, paradoxically, even if we're trying to have more control, can actually bring us some more control. It doesn't mean we're going to have fundamental existential control. We're still going to die. We're still going to suffer. But it's this strange paradox that letting go of controlling our thoughts and emotions actually brings us into a more place of ability to kind of to actually direct our mind to pay attention to things that we would like to pay attention to. So if you're willing to practice with me, I'm going to sit here and practice mindfulness and kind of guide us in a mindfulness. And you can, wherever you're at, you can sit, or if you're in your bed, you can lie down. If you're walking, you can walk, whatever you're doing. If you're sitting, I would invite you to sit in a relaxed and alert position, to have your hands either palm up or palm down in your lap in an open stance, open position. And you can close your eyes if you'd like, or you could leave them open if you'd like. And start by, if you're willing, start by bringing your attention to the experience of your feet. If your feet are on the ground, you can push your feet into the ground to experience that and notice that tension. And you're noticing with a non-judgmental awareness, the sensation of your feet on the ground is not good or bad. It's not right or wrong. It just is what it is. If your mind wanders away from this sensation of your feet on the ground, you can notice your mind wander. That's what minds do. And you don't have to judge it as good or bad, right or wrong. If you notice yourself judging your mind while it wanders, you can notice the judgment. And you can gently bring your awareness and attention back to the present moment experience of your feet on the ground. Now you can practice shifting your awareness from your feet, and you can slowly scan with your attention up from your feet all the way to the top of your head. In the next 30 seconds or so, just slowly scan your body, noticing without judgment any physical sensations you notice. And if your mind wanders during this time, that's normal. You can notice your mind wandering, and you can gently bring it back to the scan of your body in the non-judgmental awareness of your physical sensory experience. And now, if you're willing, see if you can hold these words in the front of your mind, this phrase, I can accept my experience as it is in this moment. I can accept my experience as it is in this moment. Notice as you sit with those words, notice your mind might wander, it might resist those words. Whatever your experience is, you can notice it with non-judgmental awareness and return to the phrase, I can accept my experience as it is in this moment. And you can notice that anything that comes up in your experience, anything that comes up in your awareness is more material to hold in this non-judgmental awareness, in this mindful acceptance. Okay, go ahead. If your eyes are closed, you can open your eyes. So mindfulness can connect us to our experience in the present moment, which I'm more and more convinced is the only moment we have. And there's a very common sense way of thinking about that my son, I've been using Sonny in examples a lot, but he's one of those kids who asked a ton of questions. He still does, but especially when he was 3 or 4, he was asking questions upon questions upon questions, which could be really fun sometimes. Sometimes not, but a lot of times I like that. Maybe it's because I like to talk. I don't know. But anyway, he was looking at a calendar, and when he was probably 3 or 4 years old, and there was a couple days in the future in the calendar that said, dinner at grandma's house. And he saw that and he said, okay, so we're going to grandma's house not tomorrow, but the next day. And either me or my wife, we were both there, said, yeah, we call that the day after tomorrow. And he said, okay, day after tomorrow. And he kind of had this paused look, and then he said, wait a minute, but when it's tomorrow, it'll be today. And he looked at us like, and then he said, it's never tomorrow, it's always today. And this insight he had as a 4-year-old is something that Alan Watts writes a lot about in his writings and in his speeches. He talks about the wisdom of insecurity. And it's this very kind of common sense, but seemingly strange notion that there's no such thing as the future and there's no such thing as the past. That the present is, we always are in the present for eternity, for the eternity of our experience. Whether we believe in a experience outside of our earth life, before or after, whatever that is, we're already in it. We're in eternity, and we are never in the future. We're never in the past. Our minds can conceive of a future and a past. Our minds have a construct of a future and a past, and that can be really helpful to us. We can learn from the past in ways that other nonverbal creatures can't. We have nostalgia, and we can write history, and we can read about, emperors from thousands of years ago, and all sorts of interesting things, and cultures that are long past. And for the future, we can plan ahead, and we can prepare, and we can imagine and create what we're imagining, or attempt to, at least. So there's this big blessing that we have with our ability to conceptualize future and past. But it makes us have this, a couple of things. One is, they're both illusions. They can be helpful illusions, but they can be very damning illusions. We can get stuck in the past, in shame, in resentment, in wishing things were like they used to be. Like nostalgia can have that kind of dark side. With the future, we can get really afraid of what's coming, or what might come, or what will not come if we don't do things right now. We're going to miss all these opportunities if we don't make all the right choices right now. And so Sonny and Alan Watts and a lot of other contemplative practitioners have had this insight that future and past do not exist. The present exists, and we're always like on the tip of this wave of the present. It's always unfolding right now. And it's harder for us as humans, as verbal creatures, to kind of be in the present, especially when there's some kind of discomfort in the present. So it's especially hard for people who are having some sort of mental health condition, or anxiety disorder, or depressive disorder. It's hard for people who are struggling with compulsive behaviors, or substance abuse, or other things, because their body and their mind, especially their mind, is trying to get them out of the present, trying to distract them or avoid. So uncertainty is similar. Uncertainty is less comfortable than certainty, of course. And so mindfulness can help us connect in the present moment, and connect to the reality of things as they are. And things as they are much less certain than we'd like to think. Things as they are, there's a lot that's out of our control. Things are much more wild, uncertain, random, and out of our control than we'd like to think. And so how do we deal with that? How do we accept that? So let's talk for a moment about this problem with clinging. So a clinging orientation to life sets us up to be fragile. There's this phrase that researchers in contextual behavioral science say, and the phrase is, if you can't have it, or if you can't have it, you will. So that's kind of a little different than clinging. That's the opposite of clinging. Like if you have to push something away or avoid it, then you're more likely to have it as a powerful thing in your life. With clinging, if we have to have something, then it might be more fragile to us if it is taken away, or if it's gone somehow. So that for certainty, if we have to be certain, or with meaning, if it's like we're really clinging to meaning, we have to figure out what everything means all the time, that can set us up for some problems. We usually think of meaning as value positive, like meaning itself is a good thing. But we can think of, the Third Reich, right? The way they made meaning, the way they made sense of the world was really dangerous and really destructive and awful for a lot of people. When someone experiences unexpected loss or death or crisis, if someone comes up to them to try to comfort them and says, "Don't worry, it all makes sense. This was meant to be." For a lot of people, that might not be that comforting or helpful. It might be more of a selfish way for the person who's trying to comfort them to not have to face the reality of the reality of meaninglessness that does confront us. So meaning can be great, certainty can be great. It's not that these things are bad. It's that the reality, when we connect with the reality, especially during pain, we're going to be confronted with uncertainty. We're going to be confronted with meaninglessness. We're going to be confronted with the lack of control. And the idea is, rather than escaping or avoiding those, or clinging to certainty and meaning so that we don't ever have to experience those things, we can be open even to these seemingly existentially dangerous constructs like uncertainty or doubt or meaninglessness or lack of control or any number of negative emotions or thoughts. And one of the ideas is all of these things, certainty, control, meaning, satisfaction, all these things, happiness, love, they're things that we cling to because our mind experiences them as safe and secure and comfortable. And our mind is kind of evolutionarily, seems to be hardwired to cling to that at the expense of things that we value in the here and now. And so clinging to this might come at the cost of connecting and loving people right here, right now. So there's this term that some of you have probably heard called epistemic humility. And a great example of epistemic humility is Socrates. And one of his famous phrases attributed to him is, "One thing only I know, and that is that I know nothing." So it's this idea of like, you're prioritizing the thing that you know more than anything else is your own inability to know, your inability to have all knowledge. And it's kind of a paradoxical thing, because, well, that's still knowledge. But the idea is it allows us to be more open and more curious and more skeptical of our own ability to kind of stack knowledge on top of each other and come to these kind of final conclusions. Epistemic humility, I first learned that phrase in studying philosophy of science. And the argument from Karl Popper and other philosophers of science was that you can't prove anything to be true. You can have theories and then you can test them and try to prove them to be false. But he also, prioritized this kind of humble way of not declaring things as absolutely true, and still be going out into the world curious and trying to use our best methods to gain knowledge. So he wasn't saying don't even try to gain knowledge. Let's gain knowledge, but let's figure out and be really skeptical of our methods of gaining knowledge. Skeptical not in a cynical way, skeptical in an open, in a curious, in a humble way, if that makes sense. So epistemic humility is very powerful in important for scientists. As a therapist, I've found it super valuable for me in meeting with a person. In therapy, usually you're doing what people call intake or assessments, a biopsychosocial assessment. You're going, okay, I'm learning about their history and their experience and all these things, and you're listening for certain things, and you're putting together diagnoses and treatment plans. And sometimes that kind of sense of assessing, people think, okay, I've done that, now I'll move on, and now I'm going to tell this person what to do to live their life and to be happy and well. And I think a lot of the best therapists treat assessment as this ongoing thing. You can never fully know the other person, and we're always going to be curious and approach them in a new way, like it's a new beginning. We use our beginner's mind to say, okay, let me listen like this is the first time I'm listening. You can think of if you have experience with Christian writings, you can think of 1 Corinthians, where Paul is writing about charity, and I think it's chapter 13, and he's talking about what charity is, and it's all these beautiful things, and it's not these other things. And then he says, we see through a glass darkly. And I think that's a way of saying we don't really get it. And if we approach other people like that, how much more charitable and curious will we be, and how much more alive will our relationships be if we approach them like, I want to love them, I want to care for them, and I don't really know them, even if I've known them for 20 years. I don't really know. It's a different being. It's an alien other, not an other to, push away, but an other to continually seek and try to understand and try to love. So epistemic humility to me is a framework that we can bring into our interpersonal relationships. One of the things I like about it is we can be freed from a false sense of certainty and security when we're epistemically humble. We can be curious then what remains. What remains when a lot of the things we thought we knew kind of crumble down? Does love remain? Does hope remain? Even if those are questioned, well, at least does our life remain? Our heart's beating. Our experience remains. And what we build from that might be even more sustainable kinds of love and hope and life. So we don't have a lot more time unless Zoom adds some more time to us. We'll see, maybe they will. But I want to talk about psychological flexibility. This is a construct that has arisen in the kind of therapy field, specifically contextual behavioral science, in the last 20 to 30 years. And psychological flexibility is defined as the ability to contact one's private, personal experience. So those are thoughts, emotions, sensations in the moment, and still moving toward our chosen values. That's kind of a technical, weird definition, but basically being able to be fully present with what's going on for us, the stuff that other people can't see, our thoughts, our emotions, our physical sensations, and rather than reacting towards those, which oftentimes can be a reaction away from what we value or care about, when it's more of an escape or avoidance orientation, and going towards what we care about, what we value. And there's a model of psychological flexibility, which is these 6 different kind of mid-level processes, they say, but the 6 components of psychological flexibility. So one is present moment awareness. That's what we've been talking a lot about. So be here now is kind of a phrase for that. Ram Dass wrote a book called Be Here Now about being, prioritize being rather than doing, focusing on where I'm at rather than the grass is always greener or something like that. But right here, I'm right here now. I'm going to attend to the here. I'm going to attend to the now. And I'm going to attend to being in myself, in the beingness or the I amness in others. Acceptance and willingness is this kind of sense of opening up. Like we practice in mindfulness, cognitive diffusion is this ability to notice or observe our thoughts rather than clinging to them or pushing them away. And then self as context is a little bit trickier to define. It gets into spiritual domains more that don't have that vocabulary. But it's basically, rather than identifying with our ego or the certain labels that we carry in the world, identifying with this sense of living awareness, the sense of ongoing process. And people experience this oftentimes in very deep meditation. Sometimes people experience this when they're doing some sort of, people doing hallucinogenic experiences experience that in a very quick way. And it can be nightmarish for people because you lose yourself. It's like your ego is dying, and that can be really scary. Or it can be a feeling of pure kind of connection and communion. Over here we have values clarification, which is remembering what matters. And remembering is important because what matters to us fades, and what usually demands our attention is what's causing us pain or causing the problems that our mind is coming up with. And so it's important, and this is where a lot of contemplative practices and spiritual traditions invite ritual in to help us remember. And of course, ritual can lose It's a capacity to help us remember. And so we need to figure out how to remember. How do we remember what's valuable to us? And in committed action, that's what we're really good at doing in the West. We have our national motto. I don't think it's really e pluribus unum. I think it's just do it. It's that Nike motto, and that can be really helpful for certain things. It can be really, not very helpful if we're doing the just do it, but we're not going towards what we really value. And so we want our committed actions or our goals or whatever that is to be in line with what we value and what we care about. So sometimes I like to think about psychological flexibility in terms of, sometimes it can be easier to define it in a lot of terms against what it's not. So here's what psychological inflexibility would be, stuck in the past or future rather than present moment awareness, experiential avoidance rather than opening up, or rather than acceptance and willingness, cognitive fusion or being stuck to our thoughts, or having to push them away, self as ego rather than self as context, inaction or destructive action rather than committed action, and values confusion rather than values clarification. So that's just to put that further. So I'm going to show you a picture of this window that I stared out of for 3 days a couple years ago when I was at Whidbey Island in the off the coast of Washington State. I went to a mindfulness retreat for DBT practitioners at the Whidbey Institute on Whidbey Island, and I was very fortunate. There was probably 25 of us there, maybe about that many, and we were kind of in this rectangle around this room, sitting in chairs or sitting cross-legged on the floor. And for most of the time, we were sitting out from the circle. We were sitting out. And some people were facing a wall that was like a foot in front of them for the whole 3 days. And I was facing this window for like 3 days. And it was early fall, and so it was beautiful weather. Sometimes it was raining. But I was looking out at these trees and looking out at this sculpture you can see in the middle here, this interesting kind of sculpture shape, this open circle. And I was sitting there for 3 days doing the silent retreat. So we were silent and we were still. In between meditation sits, we would eat food, but it was also silent and solitary. And it was a really wonderful experience. And one of the things that I noticed, the further things got and the more I kind of got into the zone of being able to do it, was that the reality of impermanence and the reality of flow and became more real. And this is going to stop in about a minute, just so you guys know. So if it stops, thanks for being here. But this sculpture is called, I went and looked at it later after I'd been there that whole time, and it's called Portal. And it really, to me, illustrates in a form this idea of uncertainty, rather than having a closed circle of certainty and of meaning of I've figured it all out, this is what it is. Having certainty can be a certain amount of groundedness, can be helpful, and yet staying open to what is and what will be, and the fact that we don't know.